Professor Zix 427's tentacles rippled with barely concealed superiority as he gestured at the holographic projection of Earth's oceans. His translucent appendages cast dancing shadows across the lecture hall's curved walls, matching his theatrical delivery. And here we observe yet another example of how the supposedly dangerous Deathworld Earth harbors some of the galaxy's most docile aquatic ecosystems, he announced, his voice modulator perfectly calibrated to convey academic condescension. Note the complete lack of plasma-based defenses, the absence of quantum-locking predatory techniques, and most tellingly, he paused for effect, not a single species capable of psychic dominance. From the back row of the amphitheater, Sarah Chen had to stuff her fist in her mouth to keep from laughing out loud. 6 months at the Galactic Academy of Xenobiological Sciences had taught her many things, chief among them being that alien professors could be just as pompous as human ones. But this was reaching new heights of unintentional comedy. Her barely contained snicker earned her a concerned wobble from Blob, her best friend and lab partner. Like most gelatinous collective entities, Blob's real name consisted of a series of subtle molecular vibrations impossible for human vocal cords to reproduce. Unlike most collective entities, Blob had a sense of humor about it and had chosen their own nickname. Sarah friend Blob whispered, their translucent form rippling with concern, your respiratory patterns indicate amusement. But Professor Zix 427 is the foremost authority on non-sentient life forms in this sector. His research on the pacifistic nature of Earth's oceans is widely cited. Sarah just shook her head, shoulders trembling with suppressed laughter as the professor continued his lecture, now featuring footage of a dolphin playfully nudging a floating piece of seaweed. Observe the primitive hunting techniques Zix 427 droned on, completely missing the fact that the dolphin was clearly playing. Such inefficient expenditure of energy would never survive on a truly hostile world. The rest of the class, a diverse collection of gaseous, crystalline, and various amorphous beings, dutifully took notes. Their datapads hummed and flickered as they recorded every word of what Sarah recognized as possibly the most hilariously wrong lecture she'd ever attended. A particularly dramatic gesture from the professor sent his tentacles swishing through the hologram of a gentle manatee grazing on seagrass. And here we see further evidence of the evolutionary dead end that is Earth's marine biology, no natural weapons whatsoever. That did it. Sarah couldn't hold it in anymore. A sharp bark of laughter escaped her, echoing through the acoustic-enhancing architecture of the lecture hall. Every eye analog in the room swiveled toward her, including Professor Zix 427's cluster of optical organs, which narrowed in obvious annoyance. Blob's form vibrated with embarrassment on her behalf, their usually clear body turning a mortified shade of pink. In the 6 months they'd known each other, they'd never seen their human friend lose composure like this. More concerning was the predatory way Professor Zix 427 was now turning his full attention toward the back row, all 4 of his hearts visibly pulsing with irritation through his transparent thorax. Perhaps. Professor Zix 427's voice modulator crackled with barely contained irritation. Our human exchange student would care to share what she finds so amusing about basic xenobiology. The temperature in the lecture hall dropped several degrees as Sarah felt hundreds of alien eyes focus on her. Blob had somehow managed to shrink to half their usual size, trying to create distance from the impending academic execution they were sure was about to occur. Sarah straightened in her seat, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Actually, Professor, I would love to share my perspective on Earth's marine biology. With your permission, of course. The professor's tentacles twisted in what the class had learned to recognize as his equivalent of a sneer. Oh? And what qualifications does a student from a level 12 Deathworld have to challenge the established research of the galactic scientific community? Well, Sarah replied, standing up and making her way down the lecture hall steps, I did spend 3 summers as a marine biology intern at the Great Barrier Reef Research Station. And I've actually been in the water with quite a few of Earth's ocean species. She paused, then added with deliberate casualness, including several you haven't mentioned yet. A ripple of curious murmurs spread through the class. Most of them had never heard of anyone voluntarily entering a large body of water, let alone one containing other life forms. Professor Zix 427's color shifted to a deeper shade of azure, a sign of amusement among his species. Very well then. Please, Enlighten us with your first-hand experience. His tone made it clear he expected this to be a valuable lesson in humbling a presumptuous student. Sarah reached the lecture podium, interfacing her personal device with the holographic system. The professor drifted back, his tentacles curled in anticipation of what he clearly expected to be an embarrassing display of primitive understanding. "Thank you, Professor," Sarah said, her fingers dancing across the control panel. "I'd like to access the Earth Oceanic Database, specifically the Predator Archives." Her smile widened slightly as she noticed blobs starting to regain their normal size, curiosity apparently overcoming their earlier embarrassment. The holographic display flickered as it connected to Earth's servers. Sarah could feel the professor hovering behind her, probably assuming she was struggling with the advanced alien technology. Little did he know she'd spent the last 6 months preparing for a moment exactly like this. "Before I begin," she turned to address the class, her expression serious but with a glint in her eye. "I should warn you that some of what I'm about to show you might be a bit intense, especially for species evolved in low-threat environments." Professor Zix 427 let out a dismissive harmonic tone, the equivalent of a scoff. "I'm sure we can handle whatever passes for intense on your world, Ms. Chen." Sarah's grin widened. "If you say so, Professor." She tapped the final command, and the holographic display burst to life with crystal-clear footage of Earth's oceans. "Let's start with something familiar, shall we?" The holographic display shimmered with crystal-clear footage of a pod of bottlenose dolphins, their sleek bodies dancing through sun-dappled waters. A collective sigh of appreciation rippled through the classroom as the dolphins performed what appeared to be an elaborate underwater ballet. As Professor Zix 427 correctly noted, Sarah began, her voice dripping with honey-sweet sincerity. "Earth's oceans are home to many playful creatures. These dolphins are highly intelligent social animals that even help injured members of their pod." She paused as a particularly cute scene showed a baby dolphin nuzzling its mother. From their spot in the back row, Blob noticed something unsettling about their friend's presentation style. Sarah's words matched the professor's assessment perfectly, but there was something in her eyes, a glimmer of barely contained mirth, that made Blob's gelatinous form quiver with anticipation. The display shifted to a group of seals basking in the sun, their rotund bodies sprawled lazily across rocky shores. "And here we have what we call seals," Sarah continued, "remarkable creatures that spend their time alternating between gentle swimming and peaceful sunbathing." Professor Zix 427's tentacles waved in smug satisfaction. "Precisely. A perfect example of the passive nature of Earth's marine life." Sarah's smile widened just a fraction. "Oh, absolutely, Professor. And look at these magnificent whales." The hologram now showed a massive humpback whale breaching the surface, water cascading off its enormous form as it crashed back into the ocean. Such graceful giants, feeding on tiny plankton and small fish. The class chittered and burbled in appreciation. A crystalline student near the front actually started resonating in harmony with the whale's recorded songs. Even the more skeptical students were beginning to nod their various appendages in agreement with the professor's earlier assertions. Blob watched as Sarah masterfully wove through more footage: sea otters cracking shells on their bellies, manatees grazing peacefully on seaweed, and sea turtles gliding effortlessly through coral reefs. Each new image seemed designed to reinforce the idea of Earth's oceans as a peaceful paradise. But something was off. Sarah kept shooting knowing looks at Blob, each glance making them more nervous. They'd spent enough time with their human friend to recognize when she was setting up what humans called a punchline. The fact that this particular setup had lasted nearly 15 minutes was deeply concerning. And of course, Sarah's voice took on an almost theatrical quality. "We can't forget about our coral reefs. These beautiful underwater gardens host countless species, all living together in perfect harmony." The display showed vibrant coral formations teeming with colorful fish. Professor Zix 427 was practically glowing with vindication. "You see, class, even the human student confirms our research. Earth's oceans are a prime example of evolutionary pressure favoring cooperative, non-aggressive species." Sarah's grin reached new heights of mischief. Though she added casually, "It's interesting you mention evolutionary pressure, Professor, because there's something fascinating about all these peaceful creatures we've been watching." Bob's entire form tensed. There it was, the shift in tone they'd been dreading. "You see," Sarah continued, her finger hovering over the display controls, "all these lovely animals we've been watching, They're not at the top of Earth's marine food chain. In fact, they're prey. The word prey sent a ripple of unease through the classroom. Several gaseous students condensed slightly in anxiety. Prey Professor Zix 427's voice modulator crackled with confusion. Prey to what? Sarah's finger descended toward the control panel with deliberate slowness. I'm so glad you asked, Professor. Let me introduce you to some of Earth's actual apex predators. Blob quickly adjusted their molecular density to its highest setting. Whatever was coming, they had a feeling they'd want to be as solid as possible for it. The holographic display shifted to show a great white shark gliding serenely through deep blue waters, its movements graceful and controlled. Several students leaned forward, intrigued by its streamlined form. This, Sarah said softly, is Carcharodon carcharias, the great white shark, one of Earth's oldest surviving species, virtually unchanged for over 400 million years. She paused, letting that number sink in. Want to know why they haven't needed to evolve much in all that time? Because they were already perfect. Professor Zix 427's tentacles curled dismissively. Perfect for what, exactly? Sarah's smile turned predatory. Killing. The display erupted into violent motion. A great white mouth agape launched itself at a seal. Rows of serrated teeth flashed in the sunlight. The water churned red. Half the class recoiled in horror. Two gaseous students partially dissipated in shock. Those teeth you're seeing, Sarah continued, zooming in on a shark's jaw. They're serrated for maximum damage. And they're not just one row. Sharks have multiple rows of teeth. When they lose one, another rotates forward to replace it. Some species can go through 50,000 teeth in a lifetime. Blob had turned a sickly shade of green, their usual translucent form clouded with distress. But they couldn't look away as Sarah brought up more footage. Their sense of smell is so acute they can detect a single drop of blood from a quarter-mile away. Their electroreceptive organs can sense the heartbeat of prey hiding under sand. Every aspect of their biology is engineered for hunting. Their skin is made of tiny teeth-like structures for perfect hydrodynamics. Their skeletons are pure cartilage for maximum flexibility, and they must keep swimming or they'll die. They are living weapons. The professor's color had faded to a pale blue. Surely they avoid human settlements. Sarah's laugh made several crystalline students vibrate in alarm. Oh no, Professor. Let me tell you about the USS Indianapolis. She pulled up historical footage, her voice taking on a storyteller's cadence. In 1945, a Japanese torpedo sank this naval ship. Around 900 men went into the water. The sharks came within hours. For 4 days they fed. Only 316 men survived. A horrified silence fell over the lecture hall. But here's the truly incredible part, Sarah continued, her eyes gleaming. Humans don't hate sharks for this. We don't fear them enough to try to wipe them out. No, we study them, we track them, we protect them. She brought up footage of marine biologists tagging sharks, of conservation efforts, of shark sanctuaries. We found these perfect killing machines so fascinating that we passed laws to preserve them. We create protected areas where they can thrive. We even get in the water with them in special cages, of course, just to observe them up close. Professor Zix 427's tentacles had wrapped tightly around his thorax, a sign of extreme distress. You willingly preserve these monsters. Preserve them? Professor, we name them. Sarah pulled up an image of a massive great white. This is Deep Blue, possibly the largest great white shark ever filmed. She's a celebrity among marine biologists. We celebrate when we spot her. She switched to footage of different shark species in rapid succession. Tiger sharks, bull sharks, oceanic whitetips, hammerheads. We have hundreds of species, each evolved for different hunting strategies. Some hunt in the depths, some in reefs, some in open ocean. Some can even swim up rivers. The class watched in mute horror as Sarah showed them hammerheads hunting stingrays, tiger sharks taking down sea turtles, and great whites breaching the surface to catch seals mid-air. And the best part, Sarah's voice dropped to an almost conspiratorial whisper. Sharks aren't even the scariest things in Earth's oceans. Would you like to see what lurks in the deep? Blob, who had been maintaining their densest possible form throughout the presentation, somehow managed to solidify even further. They knew their friend well enough to recognize when she was building up to something even more terrifying. The professor's voice modulator emitted a weak static crackle. He seemed physically unable to respond, his tentacles now completely wrapped around himself in a defensive ball. "I'll take that as a yes," Sarah said cheerfully, her fingers dancing across the control panel once more. The holographic display plunged into darkness, illuminated only by pinpricks of bioluminescence. Sarah's voice took on an almost reverent quality as she spoke into the terrified silence. "Welcome to the deep ocean, where evolution got really creative." A female anglerfish materialized in the display, her razor-sharp teeth and glowing lure causing several students to emit distress pheromones. "See that little light? It's not to help her see, it's to lure prey close enough to be devoured. And the males? They bite into the female and literally fuse with her body, becoming nothing but sperm-producing parasites." Professor Zix 427's color had faded to an almost transparent white. His tentacles hung limply as Sarah continued her nightmare tour of Earth's marine depths. But that's just the beginning. Let's talk about the giant squid. The display showed massive tentacles emerging from the darkness, wrapping around a sperm whale. These creatures fight battles in the darkness that we've only recently managed to film. They have the largest eyes in the animal kingdom, up to 10 inches across, because when you're hunting in the abyss, you need every advantage you can get. Blob had given up trying to maintain their usual amorphous form and had settled into a perfectly spherical shape, their species' panic response. They watched in horrified fascination as their friend gleefully traumatized the entire xenobiology department. "And here's something that will really bake your neurons," Sarah grinned, pulling up footage of a seemingly innocuous jellyfish, immortal jellyfish. "When it faces death, it reverts to its juvenile form and starts its life cycle over again. Theoretically, it could live forever. We found an essentially immortal creature in our oceans, and it's not even the most interesting thing down there." The display shifted to show a gulper eel's massive jaw unhinging to swallow prey larger than itself, then a bobbit worm ambushing fish from its burrow, followed by a vampire squid expelling bioluminescent mucus to confuse predators. The pressure at these depths would crush most spacecraft, yet these creatures thrive there. Some can generate their own light, others can survive in water hot enough to melt lead near hydrothermal vents, and many don't even need to see because light doesn't reach their habitat. Sarah paused, noticing that the professor's color had become so faint he was nearly invisible. His species equivalent of fainting, she recalled from her xenobiology studies. "But you know what's really fascinating?" She leaned forward, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "Humans are exploring deeper every year. We build specialized submarines just to study these creatures. We've barely scratched the surface of what's down there, and we can't wait to discover more." The professor's voice modulator emitted a weak whimper. "But why?" "Because we find them beautiful," Sarah replied simply. "These creatures evolved in the most extreme environment on our planet, and each one is a testament to life's incredible adaptability. Yes, many of them are terrifying by your standards, but to us, they're magnificent." She pulled up one final image, a human research vessel above the Mariana Trench. "Right now, there are humans in submarines diving into the darkest parts of our oceans, hoping to discover new species that might be even stranger than what we've already found. Because that's what humans do, we look into the darkness and wonder what's looking back." The professor finally collapsed into a puddle of pale, trembling tentacles. The lecture hall remained frozen in stunned silence. A medical drone had already whisked Professor Zix 427 away to the infirmary, his color still showing no signs of returning to normal. Sarah stood at the podium, casually flipping through footage of humans swimming with whale sharks and diving in submersibles to extreme depths. "So you see," she concluded cheerfully, "Earth's oceans aren't actually docile at all. They're one of the most competitive and dangerous environments on our planet. But that's exactly why we love them." She pulled up a final series of clips: marine biologists tagging great whites, deep-sea researchers discovering new species, and tourists excitedly climbing into shark cages. "We don't just tolerate these creatures, we study them, protect them, and yes, sometimes we even swim with them for fun. Because to humans, something being dangerous doesn't make it less fascinating. If anything, it makes us more curious." A crystalline student in the front row had developed several stress fractures. You seek them out voluntarily." "Oh, absolutely," Sarah beamed. "Shark cage diving is a popular tourist activity. People pay good money to get close to great whites. We have whole TV channels dedicated to shark documentaries. There's even an annual Shark Week celebration." From the back of the room, Blob had finally managed to regain some of their normal shape, though they still vibrated with each new revelation. Their normal translucent blue now swirled with patterns of both terror and awe, an emotional display Sarah had never seen before. But the professor said a gaseous student began, their voice trailing off into confused wisps. The professor made the same mistake many species make about Earth, Sarah explained kindly. He assumed that because humans appear soft and squishy compared to some species, our planet must be equally soft. But we evolved alongside everything I just showed you. These creatures aren't monsters to us, they're our neighbors. She switched off the holographic display, plunging the room into blessed darkness. Class dismissed. And if anyone's interested, I'm leading a virtual reality tour of the Mariana Trench next week. You know, the place where we found a fish that can melt submarines. The lecture hall emptied with unprecedented speed, leaving only Blob behind, still processing everything they'd witnessed. They oozed down to the podium where Sarah was gathering her things. "Sarah, friend," they pulsed quietly. "I believe I now understand why you laughed when I warned you about the dangerous acid pools in the campus recreation area." Sarah grinned. "Yeah, after swimming with bull sharks, a little acid just doesn't seem that scary anymore." Humans are Blob's form rippled, searching for the right word. Terrifying. Awe. Thanks, Sarah beamed, taking it as a compliment. "Want to get lunch?" "I brought some videos of the bobbit worms hunting techniques we could watch while we eat." Blob's horrified quiver was answer enough.